Ukraine's use of information warfare and ability to sort of, well, smoke and mirrors, right? They've been doing a remarkable job of keeping things on the down low before then doing these remarkable strikes, like the drone strike back in, what was it, May, June? Take me through your thoughts on that side.
On the shipping container
but also
attack,
just
is what you're
Ukraine's
referring to on the bomber
remarkable
bases.
approach.
I mean, I think that was so. What's funny is that in my book, The Wind Machine, Wind Machine actually kind of predicted that because China did it to the United States in that book. But I guess one interesting thing about those drone attacks is that it just ushered in a new era of asymmetric warfare, where basically you have someone can take a shipping container, load it with drones. If those drones can't access GPS, then they'll use AI on board those drones. And you can take out Whiteman Air Force Base, take out the B-52s at Whiteman Air Force Base with just a shipping container parked on the highway. And that should terrify you, because Whiteman Air Force Base is just a couple of miles from the highway. And there's really no way you can stop that, at least not without counter-drone munitions or something. Unless you're looking for it, you're never going to stop that attack. So that was brilliant, and I think it kind of changed what we think of as warfare by using a bunch of small, cheap drones to destroy hardware that not only is extremely expensive, but you can't build anymore, right? I believe Russia is still building TU backfire bombers. I believe they're still building backfires, but at a rate of like one every couple of years. The Bears, they're never going to build that again. Now, the Bear bombers, the Kolars, the radar planes, those AN-72 Kolar, I believe, they're not going to build any more of those. Like, they're working with a lot of equipment that was still from the Cold War. They are still manufacturing fighters and bombers, medium-range bombers like the Su-34, but at a rate of maybe 50 to 60 small aircraft per year. And for a while, they weren't even replacing losses. Now, the only reason they're able to build up their Air Force is that they're not really using it anymore. They're using it to drop glide bombs from a safe distance, then hurry back home before Ukraine can kind of mount any defense.
Yeah, I can see that. But what about the prospect of using Tomahawks and like more heavy-duty military equipment, right?
So
that's a big deal.
The Tomahawk thing is pretty interesting because, first off, the question is, all right, well, they might want to shoot Tomahawks, but how are they gonna fire them, right? So there is a method called, there's containerization. They took a Tomahawk missile and they put them inside shipping containers, standard 40-foot shipping containers. I think the original idea was, well, we can put this thing on an LCS, a littoral combat ship. We can strap it to the helicopter deck of an LCS, and now we have an LCS with long-range strike capability. I believe they did the same thing with the SM-6 missile. They containerized that as well. And the next step was, all right, well, we can containerize the Tomahawk. We can containerize the SM-6. Let's put this shipping container on a truck with a trailer. And now you have a ground-launched Tomahawk missile, right? So these are all really useful ways of launching a missile. Now, in the case of Ukraine, it hasn't really been said how they're going to launch the missile. I mean, you can give a missile to Ukraine, and that's great. But unless there's a way to launch it, it's a nice toy. They can put it on a static display, but there's nothing else they can do with it. So I think that if we give them Tomahawk missiles, odds are they will be the containerized version of the Tomahawk missile, because for the most part, those missiles are, they're sea-launched. We used to have a land-based missile. I think we gave that up during the peace accords in the 80s. I believe we used to have an air-launched version as well. But the ground launch and air launch versions, I want to say, were nuclear. And I'm sure someone's going to say, well, we never really had the air launched version. I believe it wouldn't be that difficult to reprogram the thing to do an air launched version. It just takes time and software code to do.
So not as big a deal, not a game changer as some people don't like me used on the channel.
People saying that word, like everything was supposed to be a game changer, and it never. The F-16s are supposed to be a game changer. I don't know if there's any one piece of equipment that you could actually point to and say, yes, this will win the war.
I've been reading a lot more history in recent months. But for me, what's interesting is that a lot of people still think that the war can be won on the battlefield. But in my mind, it's not that way. It's either going to come because the Russian war machine on the back end breaks down, or because NATO just completely discontinues support for Ukraine, and somehow it eventually is just overwhelmed by the larger numbers of Russia, right? But that would mean a long, long war of attrition. Has there been any signs from you no, you're welcome to disagree with that sort of
No.
but is there any signs from you that you've seen, aside from what we've covered maybe on the Russian economic angle, that things are shifting more consistently with the momentum on one side or the other?
No, I mean, it seems like from an economic standpoint, the balance is kind of tilting toward Ukraine, because Ukraine can always get funding from outside sources. That isn't necessarily the case for Russia, and that's kind of a big deal. Now, I think one of the other issues is that I don't ever see Russia overwhelming Ukraine with numbers, because these people, they're going to fight. Oh my God, they're just going to keep fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. Like they're these guys, they made Molotov cocktails and put them by bus stations. I don't ever see these guys just rolling over. Right? They're going to keep fighting until they can't fight anymore. This is one of those things that I guess exists as kind of a fantasy in Russia. Eventually, will steamroller over them. But I don't really see that happening, because they haven't been able to manage a breakthrough. And the Ukrainians are just so focused on protecting their country that I don't really see any kind of Russian breakthrough, if it were to occur, being very successful, because these people will fight with Molotov cocktails if they have to. And then you have an insurgency, and look how well that worked for the United States, right? Insurgencies tend to be messy. I don't see, conversely, I don't really see a way for Ukraine to gain back its territory in one massive assault. They just don't have the people to do that. And they might be able to periodically gain ground by using things like robotics. They've already, I think it was last December, I want to say, they used the first ever all robotic attack against lines, and they were actually able to capture and hold territory with these unmanned ground vehicles. And that was actually pretty darned impressive. So if they're able to do more of that they might be able to gain more territory, but I don't see them liberating all of Donetsk with robots. Yep. There's going to be a cost to any kind of liberation. The only way they'll be able to do that is if Russia collapses. And if you're on the front lines and you're no longer getting regular deliveries of food, pretty soon, if you have no food and you have a gun, pretty soon you're going to have food, right? You're going to leave your position to go look for food. You're going to go into a town. You're going to steal food. You're going to take food. So unless that starts happening, I don't see Ukraine being able to take back a lot of land, because they just don't have the forces for that.
Lessons should the West or NATO or whoever be taking from Ukraine? Because at this point, they are more innovative or leading the pack, so to speak, in military techniques than a lot of Western Europe is, that's for sure. And maybe parts of Eastern Europe, like Poland, not so much, because they know the threat that Putin poses. But what lessons should the West be doing? Germany's waking up. Europe seems to be waking up. But, what sort of principles should people be taking mostly from Ukraine, apart from resistance and unrelenting defense?
Well, I think probably the biggest takeaway here is you need to have a robust Air Force, because I know people want to talk about drones and stuff like that, but the fact is that Russia can launch as many drones as they want. Let's say they went to war with NATO. Russia can launch as many drones as they want, but they're going to do it hungry and without any generator fuel, right? To charge those drones. They might get a couple of drones off, and then they're not going to be able to recharge these things. The one thing that, to go into a different area of conflict here, you look at Israel versus Iran. Why was Israel able to defeat Iran? Well, because they had long-range precision fires. They were using aircraft to launch missiles or drop bombs. And I think the reason that the conflict has kind of stagnated, or why Russia couldn't really execute their war plans to full effect, was that deconfliction is hard. And if your Air Force isn't quite good enough, if you don't own the skies, then eventually you're going to get into this grinding World War I type battle. So I think the one thing that needs to be taken away is not we need more drones. It's we need more air power, better air power, long range air power that can strike logistics, that can allow for close air support so that units can maneuver on the ground to end a conflict quickly. Because if you can't end that conflict quickly, then you're going to get into this grinding fight. I think that's the biggest takeaway. It's not we need more drones. Drones are going to be a thing, absolutely. But I think a lot of this goes back to air power. Do you own the air? And even more than that, do you own space? Because the U.S. Space Force was created to actively deny our adversaries the domain of space. And that's a pretty darned important mission for the U.S. Space Force. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway, is that nations need air power. And without that, you better hope you're fighting another nation without air power, because you're going to be in this grinding conflict